Hello, everybody. Welcome to the internet and to this podcast. It is episode 9.1 of Topline. I'm joined by my co-hosts Asad Zaman and AJ Bruno, CEOs respectively of Sales Talent Agency and QuotaPath. But we've got a very special guest and friend of the pod on, Tomasz Tunguz, general partner, founder of Theory Ventures, formerly Redpoint Ventures, one of the foremost prognosticators on SaaS and artificial intelligence and crypto, the three most important topics in the modern technology oeuvre. I don't know if
Is that a word, Sam?
Ouvre. I never know how to pronounce that word, but it's, like the overall discourse, I would say. Welcome to Topline, the podcast for the best founders, operators, and investors in B2B tech. Every week, AJ Bruno, Asad Zaman, and me, Sam Jacobs, will break down what's important for you to know to be the most well-informed professionals in the market.
Your deal is almost closed, and all that's left is the security review. But when it comes to those lengthy questionnaires, the endless back and forth can often cause deals to stall out, leaving your deal at risk and dollars on the table. With Vanta questionnaire automation, go-to-market teams can complete security reviews up to 5 times faster, helping you close deals in less time than ever. Visit vanta.com/topline to learn more about questionnaire automation.
Tomasz, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thrilled to be here. Happy New Year to you all.
Happy New Year's to you. Asad's going to kick off the docket, but before we get there, you have recently said, I'm hijacking this conversation because we're all very curious. You've said that you use AI 100 times an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? And explain that to us.
And how are you using it right at this second? This very second.
Yeah,
is this really second? You? That's an important
Yes. So I use dictation a lot. So big chunk of that 100. And so there's a button on my keyboard that I can pull down and it will call up an AI that will listen to my voice and it will take the audio or transcribe it into text. And then that's passed to another AI that then figures out what to do with it, whether to format it in a list or create a paragraph or eliminate the ums. And so that's a big part of it. There's another AI that I use a lot. As you can imagine, we research startups where I can hit another button on the keyboard and it will summarize a website or summarize a research paper. So if right now we're researching something called text diffusion models and whether or not that's a viable architecture. The other thing that we do is we transcribe podcasts and we extract the text from them. And so I would say a big chunk of it is both on the dictation and research. And I don't know if you guys have played with Gemini Deep Research at all, but that's a pretty special process. And then whenever we write or publish, we're using, I think Claude in particular is quite strong at capturing a voice, or I really like to use it. This might be a little masochistic, but I had this amazing AP English teacher. His name was Mr. Dunn. He was a former military guy. And I didn't like to write until I met Mr. Dunn. And I didn't like to write until maybe the second half of his class because he just held a really high standard. And now I ask my AI to grade my blog post like Mr. Dunn.
I love that you used a math teacher to now that's you like to write because of a math teacher. That's pretty impressive by itself.
Well, he was an English teacher. Did I say
he was English. Did you say math?
He was English.
I heard math.
But he was English.
No,
One of you was wrong.
Where my head is today.
Are you so these models are they running out of your system directly? So it's not the traditional ChatGPT stuff. You've actually installed some on your computer and you're using those to then feed into these other models?
Yeah, you can use, there are off-the-shelf tools that will use Claude and OpenAI and others. I think I want to see them work. I want to understand what's breaking, what's not working, what is the application developer building around the AI. And so there's one technology called Ollama that will allow you to run models locally. There's another technology that's actually part of Ollama called Cortex.so that will allow you to run local models. And what you'll find is some of the smaller open source models like Gemma 2, if you want to do any kind of text editing, it's a 2 billion parameter model, which is small. Right? You've got 2 billion, then you have 9 billion and you have like 25 billion. They go all the way up to 475 today. But the small models actually work really well for basic text editing. And I think about them as basically like encyclopedias almost with brains. I don't need a big encyclopedia to edit text. Like a very small one will work. And then you can use something like Llama 3.1, which has the same performance as GPT-4, but you can run it locally on a pretty powerful Mac. And then I've even tried the most recent Llama 3.3, which is a beefy 75 billion parameter model. And that will give you like pretty close to Claude performance. It's slow. And like I said, I have a pretty beefy machine, but it's pretty slow. So you have to be patient, but you can get it to work. And then you can see what's coming off. Like where is it making mistakes? And I posted a video yesterday playing around with an agent that was booking a flight. And
that was quite intense. I saw that and I was like, oh,
you did. Yeah. It's amazing to watch. I mean, like the way that the bounding boxes are created around the Google flights, and you can see like it makes them.
Context for the audience, if they haven't read it, he basically installed an agent that went and booked your flight for you. Very simply, like you just triggered it. I'm looking for this type of a flight. It went, it looked at the various flights, it navigated around the pop-ups and everything else, and came back to you with information that you were able to act on relatively quickly, right?
Yeah, it cost less than 3 cents. One reader asked me how much did it cost. I went back and looked. It cost less than 3 cents. I think it's probably a fraction of a cent because I tried it a few times. And then it was able to find the 2 cheapest flights from San Francisco to New York for the certain dates. Actually, there was a very astute reader who noticed that the AI made a mistake, which is it booked 2 flights from San Francisco to Newark. So it
wasn't perfect.
It was not perfect. But we'll get there. Yeah. The cool part is you can see, as you watch the computer, you can see how it creates boxes around, this is where I type in EWR, and this is where I type in San Francisco, and this is where I figure the address. And then if you've been on Google Flights or any sort of online travel agency, at the bottom, there are all these SEO optimized links. It says like Las Vegas flights and Phoenix flights, and it makes a mistake and it clicks on one of those links and it goes to New York flights. You can watch in the logs. If you look on the logs, it says made a mistake going back. And so it actually clicks the back button, goes back, and then starts the flow again. And so I think one of the reasons I like running these models locally and testing them is you can see that happening in a way that, and it's wonderful that people are building off the shelf and much easier, but I wouldn't have had that insight. I just been using somebody else's tool, for example.
Are you constantly changing models or thinking about like is this a week to week change that you're making? You rattled off about 10 different things. Is that a list that you just continue to iterate off of?
Yeah, I think it's okay. So we were at this event and there was a leader of one of these foundational model companies, and he polled the audience. He said, How many of you think that AI has improved 100 times in the last 3 years? 100 to 1,000 times in the last 3 years? So all of us raised our hands. And then he asked, how many of you believe that AI will improve 100 to 1,000 times in the next 3 years? And most of us raised our hands. And then he said, well, if you believe that, you should be living completely differently.
Interesting.
And yeah, I left that meeting, I was bewildered.
He said that because you're all investors and you should be on the forefront of new technology and you should be doing what you're doing. That's what he meant. He didn't mean as sort of regular average Joes, lay people.
Yeah, no. I think he means both. I think he means both. And so I left that meeting bewildered because, I was asking myself, how do I start to live in the future if I don't know what that future looks like? I have no idea, right? Like if AI is 1,000 times better and we have agents that are PhD equivalent or better, literally every domain at our fingertips, like what? What? Where do I go? And so it made me wonder, like, well, that means that every single process that we do at work is likely to be completely changed if we are working on a computer.
Is there anything that's scared you when you've gone through this? You're like, whoa, like either you weren't expecting, you mentioned the back button, but like just that we're like, you feel like you are now living in the future and I don't know. The unknown can cause a lot of fear and panic, but it doesn't seem like to affect
Yeah.
you in that way.
I think there's this shell shock that, oh my gosh, this is happening really fast and I better start running, because if I don't start running, I will be outdated very quickly. I think that's an extremely natural human emotion. And
I had that when you made that blog post about how much you were using it. That was that moment for me where I was like, 1 second, like I thought I was using it a lot, but this is a difference by many factors. And so I had to really like sit down and rethink how I was using AI, because it was nowhere close to like what your usage was. Like not like it wouldn't even be in the same realm. And so you do have those moments. And since then, like I've adjusted it. I'm using it a lot more. And the more you use it, the more you understand how to use it and when not to use it as well, like where it's not working that well.
Yeah, I think, like writing code, whatever, I put together, there's this software language I know nothing about called Swift. I put together an app in Swift, and that powers one of these applications where I can hit a button on the keyboard. And that couldn't tell you what it does. I mean, I can read the comments, and I know when it hits the button, it does what it's supposed to, but I couldn't tell you. Like, could not re-implement it. If you gave me a Swift interview as part of an engineering battery, no chance.
How do you quantify the difference between, let's say, I think productivity ends up being this like element where all of the effects come down to net productivity of a person, right? I can do more and I can do it better in the same amount of time. Have you been able to quantify the difference pre-AI, and not just pre like ChatGPT, but like back in the day versus today? Were you using it as it is today with its strengths and weaknesses? What's the actual difference in your abilities, productivity, etc.?
Yeah, so I haven't quantified it, but I can tell you there's a difference in feeling. So, and I don't think this is a new skill, right? I wrote a post a long time ago that was talking about the missing class from business school, which is delegation. I went to graduate schools, went to a good business school, and we were taught to negotiate. We were taught operations research. We were taught accounting, all this kind of thing. We were not taught how to delegate. And you were all leaders of companies, and I'm sure you're all effective delegators. What I've noticed with AI is if we bring a mentality of delegation, of writing a long prompt, giving it a long context, just the way that you might have a project brief that you give to one of your departmental leaders, it works really well. And so now the question with AI, I find, is I can stop at this project scope. I can write the PRD, and then I can ask Google Deep Research, go and research text diffusion models. And here are the 6 questions that I really care about. And then I can have 2 or 3 follow-up questions. That used to be someone, right? Who would go, and probably me, candidly, because we're a small shop. It used to be me. And I would go and spend a week or 3 or 4 days going and reading the research papers, highlighting, putting it into a document, and then summarizing it. And now I can just type it into Google Deep Research, and 5 minutes later, I have a 2.5-page memo with all the links to the papers. And then the next thing is, this paper is interesting, send it to my Kindle, right? So that I can read it or send it to the team. That level of automation hasn't happened yet. But this idea of like the number of things I delegate to a computer is much higher than it was.
I know we're going to talk about voice chat, but one thing you just said that reminded me is like, there's so many times where I'm actually going back and forth where I'm like, can you just email this to me? And I just want to check to see if it eventually gets the capability to do that. Eventually it's going to say, yeah, I can do that, but it's still not there. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of the 12 days of Christmas that OpenAI set forth. Unfortunately, not there yet.
The one I'm happiest with Gemini. I have an Android phone, and Gemini finally launched a Spotify integration. And so now you can say, play whatever song you want and it will play, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the email one or set a reminder, those kinds of things would be awesome.
Do you feel like you're obligated to have like a middle to long-term view on the end state for human productivity or for humanity? It's like there's these 2 levels that you operate at. One of them is the train's leaving the station. I've got to stay up to date. I've got to incorporate these tools into my daily workflow because I don't know how the world is going to change, but I don't want to be one of the people that it changes past when I can't catch up. And then there's that can be a fairly tactical lens, and that's, it's sort of like the singularity, like you're very zoomed in on the slope of the curve, and so you're like, I'm going to change this thing, I'm going to do this thing, but then meanwhile, if you zoom out, there's a world that we're moving towards, and that's a question that I don't actually know. I don't know what that world is that we're moving towards. Is it a world of overall the productivity gains drive massive economic output in some way, and so the overall global economy is great, and all of us are basically like micro influencers, or we've got like these agents and we've got robots at home, so we don't do any chores, and we have all of these AI agents that are doing all of our boring tasks, and we're just having sort of fun playtime a lot. Like, do you have a point of view on what the world will look like?
Yeah, yes. It's very risky to make these kinds of predictions. Very hard. I mean, what was the first robot in people's homes?
Vacuum cleaner,
A microwave, washing machine.
Yeah, it was a dishwasher.
Yeah.
And now, like, I don't know about you guys, but like my favorite kind of a pet is a Roomba, because it cleans up after itself, right? I don't have to feed it. It feeds itself off the crumbs that we leave on the kitchen floor. So, I mean, we have lots of robots in our house, and yet I still feel like we have the washing machine and the dryer. Those are all automated to some extent and becoming smarter and smarter, but still, they're still chores. And so I think it's the same in work. Like, I don't think we end up in this sort of, like lotus eating world where we're just like hanging around and
Right, Soma, we're just like blissed out and numb.
Sam really wants Wally to be a thing. He wants to go live in a ship and sit in a chair.
No. But I think there's a massive productivity wave coming in service work. Massive productivity wave. And like we can talk about like the public markets, and analysts will tell you that equities are at 20-year highs relative to bonds because of the implied premium between those two asset classes. And I understand that. And the optimist in me wants to say, well, yeah, but the reality is like a BDR will not manage one inbox of 40 emails, they'll manage 50 inboxes of 40 emails. And all other people inside of it, like the AEs, will probably double or triple their productivity, because instead of spending 75% of their time in meetings and filling out Salesforce, they'll spend 50% of their time or 60% of their time in front of customers. So I think there's a pretty significant productivity gain. And in the next, like, call it 3 to 10 years, that productivity gain will not be evenly distributed. And when that happens, you have big shifts in market share, just very exciting for venture capitalists. I think should be very exciting for any kind of investor, any kind of innovator, because the status quo shakes up. And then at some point, everyone has it. And we get back to a place where we start adding humans to companies again in large scale, because there are these processes that we find that are not tractable. They're not problems that AI can solve. And so now we need more sophisticated brains to go and solve them again.
What are your thoughts on the speed at which this happens? So with every platform shift, the speed at which it becomes mainstream seems to be increasing. Like if you look from the internet to mobile, cloud, etc., and AI, if you look at where it is today, it's gotten there much faster than previous platform shifts had gotten. But at the same time, you'll hear people say something like cloud adoption is still 30% of workloads, and it takes a while. And when I talk to companies outside of tech, great companies publicly, some are publicly traded, well-known names. When you think about their tech stack and the sophistication of the tools that they're using, it's still, it's leaps and bounds behind where your progressive tech companies will be, right? Like I like to give the example that if you ask them, what's your tech stack for your sales team, you hear CRM and Sales Navigator. You tell them, what about Gong? And they're like, what the hell is that? Like, and so what do you think is the pace at which this becomes implemented? Because it's obviously moving faster and it's really disruptive and it offers advantages that are not incremental and that are significant. And that should make it, a little bit faster than before. But yeah, what do you think? Like 3 years in, do you see more adoption of AI than we have cloud adoption today? Do you think about it like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, cloud is 30 to 40% of workloads today. It's like 1.5 trillion. And that's taken, call it 24 years to get there. So I think AI adoption to reach 30% of workloads maybe takes 15 years, something like that. Because each one of these adoption curves are faster and faster. But I don't think it's overnight. I mean, there's still, the reality is like, whatever, like the flight booking example, the return flight was a mistake, or there's lots and lots of these issues or rough edges that exist within these systems. And just the way that we learn how to use different search engines or different kinds of tools to extract what we want, there's a big education component about how
and the improvement of this stuff. So where we are today, if you look at a model and you say it's the model size, the data, and the compute that really drives the pre-training and outcome, and then you've got reasoning on top of it. Which one of these elements do you think is going to be the driver of the improvements that need to happen for AI to become more mainstream and usable within our organizations? Because as you said, as it is today, it's helpful in many areas, but it is not the game changer that we know it can be. But for it to become that game changer, something has to evolve from where we are today. But there are limitations in terms of, if data was the big unlock, well, we are at a data wall. And so now it's synthetic data that we need to create. And that tells you a little bit about where it will thrive and where it won't. But some people say it's not the data, it's just the compute. The one that has the cheapest compute and the most of it will be the winner in the end. And they usually point towards a Google in that instance. What are your thoughts in terms of what's going to lead to the improvements that will make this more usable within organizations?
Well, so I think cost is the first one. It's still really expensive to run these things. And if you talk to, we've talked to many different implementers, heads of AI at different companies, the cost structure of a lot of these models is unsustainable. It doesn't make any sense for the product to actually deploy them. So I think I was tempted to write this post, which is like AI is in its Groupon era. And what I meant by that is, you guys probably remember the Groupon era, where Groupon came out and then there were 1,000 Chinese competitors. The prices went to zero. Alibaba has cut their prices on AI by like 65, 85, and 97% in 3 different cuts in the last
DeepSeek
9 months.
That just came out as also, that was miraculous.
Right. And so they were able to train a model of $5.6 million and the other to compete with models that were trained in with the hundreds of millions. Exactly. And so I think there is a hugely deflationary pressure on the cost of inference. And that's a necessary ingredient, because this stuff needs to be really cheap in order for it to be ubiquitous. The reasoning, and you're right, like the amount of training data we've trained on all of the internet, there's something like 20 to 25 trillion tokens of text. And then there's a video transcriptions and that kind of stuff. But all of that's been that. I mean, we're using it just to the extent that we can. Now we're looking for more data, but the marginal benefit that data is less. The reasoning stuff, I think we need a research breakthrough there, because it's a different kind of machine learning called reinforcement learning. And there, our conversations with AI researchers say, like the transformer architecture, which is the basis for this big wave of innovation in AI, is everyone's expecting it not to last much longer, because it's quite old at 7 years for an AI architecture. And so people are looking forward the next one. So I think you need we want a pretty significant breakthrough around reinforcement learning. And just to make the transformer architecture is good. If it sees many examples of the same thing, it can resynthesize an example, customize to what you want. Reinforcement learning is a different kind of machine learning where, having never seen a problem before, it can iterate through a solution pretty rapidly. So you need to combine those two to get to what most people call AGI.
Do you think that, if you look at it from that perspective, do you think that we are as close to that breakthrough as, there's a lot of conversation happening in the ecosystem right now. Sam Altman wrote this blog post about how they know how to create super intelligence today. Now, everybody on that's against OpenAI is saying they're just trying to raise a new round, and this is positioning to be able to go and raise an up round on what is already a massive valuation because their burn rate requires them to raise a lot more money to be able to keep growing. But others are saying no, like they understand now what has to happen. It'll take a little bit of time, but multiple people, including the Anthropic founder, has said that we are, a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of thousand days away from AGI, or in terms of super intelligence. Do you think we're that close from what you are seeing from the outside?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to say. Well, what I mean by that is like this whole term of like AGI, nobody really knows. I mean, everyone has, there are many different definitions of what AGI is. If we're talking about AGI being PhD equivalent in a bunch of different fields, you could argue we're already there, right? Like you look at O3 and its ability to solve math problems.
Right.
But again, like, there are papers there that say just perturb the problem just a little bit and the performance ultimately falls. So is it really just, anyway. So I think it kind of hinges on your definition, but I think we're at the point now where if you wanted a living encyclopedia that could write a paper for you better than most college students, we have that. We have that. And then are we on?
The challenge there is like nobody really wants that. So that's to the point of like, what's the definition? I mean, you want that because that's what you do every day. But I think if we think of like true AGI as, her or even like Westworld or something, like there's an earpiece, you say book a hotel, get me the nicest room, it's done, 5 seconds later, hotel room booked, here's your confirmation code. Feels like we're still quite a ways. I don't even know if that's AGI. That's still just like an admin. That's just like an
It's a washing machine, Sam. That's just a washing machine.
So I think within 12 months you'll be able to do that. I don't know if it will work every time, but some in the earpiece say book the Ace Hotel in New York City on January 18th to the 20th for a single person and charge it to my credit card. I think you'll be able to do that in 12. I mean, you can kind of already do it with Perplexity's integration with Stripe. And so now it's just tiny ASR. But so this is why I think the question is tricky. Is like, well, what do you mean by AGI?
That's the most fun thing is like, what do you mean? Because if you actually click into what OpenAI's actual definition is, there's a technical definition they have in their agreement with Microsoft, which is $100 billion in profit.
That's the definition of AGI?
That's the definition of
it's
AGI.
It's a monetary definition.
In their agreement.
Sounds like a venture capitalist definition.
Because there's a stipulation that they have, which is that once you reach AGI, Microsoft doesn't have access to the IP anymore. And so when is that point? That point is $100 billion, not in revenue, but in profit. If you look at the number of companies in history that have ever done $100 billion in profit, there's a small group, right? So it's far away. So that's like their technical definition, but then obviously you can look.
That's not a very technical definition, to be fair, though. That's not a technical definition.
Yes.ai enables your CEO, subject matter experts, and other senior leaders to engage prospects directly, creating meaningful connections and boosting response rates. With just one click, your team can strategically involve senior staff to make your outreach more credible and effective. Empower your GTM team to orchestrate your outbound process and say yes to yes.ai. That's YESS.ai.
How does this affect your job as an investor? Do you think that this impacts the size of markets, the ability of certain companies to gain and retain market share? I think, we're moving out of this world, or I don't know if we're out of it, but, there was a world of SaaS, and there was this world that we were in for the last 15, 20 years where you could call them point solutions, but companies like Gong, Outreach, Sales Left, all of the tools that we know, at least in go-to-market, all the marketing automation tools, they could get to 100, 200 million in revenue. Many of them have stalled at that point, but there was sort of plausibility around getting to $1 billion, maybe penetrating the enterprise. Do you see AI native tools having that same ability and that same, because what we've talked about on this show is, I bet that there's a very vigorous market for pre-seed and seed investing, because it's easy to see that some of these tools could do 20 million, 50 million, 100 million in revenue. But some of the time it's hard to see, given how easy it is to copy models and the cost of or the value of a model rapidly, going to zero, how easy it is to create new features to the point of you creating an app on Swift, not in your spare time, but like as not one of your main priorities in life. So the question is there do you see the same opportunity for you as an investor for, are there going to be the same, is the end going to be the same? Are the same number of breakout companies going to exist? Is it, we still see that there are going to be breakout companies, but fewer of them or more of them? Is there a secular point of view that you have on, your job is to pick 10x returners? Like, do you see any difference given where we are with AI?
Yeah, I think the size of the outcomes will be significantly larger.
Ooh.
And I think the categories in which startups will succeed will be initially are the unloved categories of the previous generation. So legal software, accounting software, stock automation, these. And okay, why is that? Well, because, why do I make these 2 points? We look for companies, the AI companies at the application layer that fit into 3 boxes or check 3 boxes. The first is there's a labor market shortage for whatever reason, not enough graduates, churn rates in that role are 100% a year. So people don't want to do that. And that's because in the second box, the job has toil, really repetitive work. If there's a certification or a training manual or some kind of a test that you can put a human through, guess what? The AI can do it better. I guarantee it. And then the third is you have a hiring manager who is desperate. There's some need that they need something, not someone, but something to do this job. And so state of the art is 70 to 75% accuracy for AI for these multi-step processes. So if you have a hiring manager who desperately needs to hire somebody for a role that he cannot find, he or she is probably willing to accept the 75% accurate solution if it costs 1/6 the cost of a human. And so that's why, like, you look at paralegal work, okay, historically not many people's first choice as a job, right? You think about like a security analyst who's like reading alerts off email security note, and every day it's the same notices and there's just a ton of noise. Or, anyway, accounting, like, how many times can you look at a tax return and think it's novel? It's rote work. And so that's what I think. And then the second part will be larger. I do give some credence to this idea that AI will capture labor spend, and it will take longer to achieve it because the productivity gains happen, but the EBITDA, the profitability doesn't happen immediately. So let's say we were running an accounting firm and there's 100 accountants within that firm. We adopt AI in 2025. We're not going to suddenly repurpose a third of the organization within 2025. The cost structure will actually remain the same, may even increase. See that profitability gain. But in 2026 and 2027, the organization will start to change. We won't need to hire as many people because the bookings per accountant or the number of returns per accountant will start to increase. And so over the next 3 or 4 years, we'll start to see these pretty significant EBITDA gains or profitability gains. And so that's why I think it'll start in historically unloved industries for software or SaaS in the last wave. And the outcomes will be significant, could be significantly larger. So like the decacorn yield, the number of decacorns per 1,000 startups funded will increase.
That's nice.
Yeah. I guess the question there, though, is that the number of losers and the outcomes on the other side, like, also go up by the same number. Is there like a kind of a balancing of like, okay, you have thousands of these companies that are started, picking the winner becomes much more difficult because the outcome is way greater.
Yeah, one of the things, and I think Sam touched on this, it's much harder to separate. It's much harder to create competitive differentiation, I think, in this category, at least early on, aside from go-to-market execution. Because really what you have is the model layer. Very few companies are now building their own models. You can't differentiate there. You can build on the prompt layer, which are these instructions of how to run a paralegal brief, and you can iterate and iterate and iterate. But again, that's just time and experience. And then the last is like the UI UX. Well, I mean, realistically, like the most sophisticated UI UX is a box, like Google search box, but a little bigger. And so you can't really differentiate it. It's on at the application layer. It's all on the go-to-market. All comes down to human to human computer, human to human interactions. Can I convince a blue, whites, what do they call them? White shoe law firm. So I think that's what they call the fancy law firms. Anyway, can I convince a top law firm to adopt?
I've never been in one, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Well, then there's the green shoe. That's part of the IPO. Anyway, all kinds of different color
Does
shoes.
that scare you as an investor that the competitive advantage that seems to be the big one available is go-to-market execution, like humans hand-to-hand combat against the market? Like, does that scare you as an investor? Because in the past, maybe the competitive advantage was a little bit more technical, and less human variance and trash involved in that. Like, how are you dealing with that shift?
So I would submit there has been no shift. I would submit that most SaaS applications were web apps on databases, right? Benioff has said this, and now the reality is like you can build a web app in a couple of hours, maybe over a weekend. So they're like, the difference, technically speaking, the difference between two CRM technologies, not that huge.
Distribution.
It's all distribution, right?
Yes.
Like you read Benioff's book, like the key to Salesforce was not a multi-tenant versus a single tenant architecture. It was not the Apex language versus a different XML spec, or the fact that they were using Oracle versus MySQL under it. It's the same. Like, are you using Llama 3 or are you using Claude? End users doesn't care. So I don't know if that's really changed. And so this is why, when people ask like, will AI obviate humans in software? The answer is no, because the point of humans in software sales has always been to engender trust. And that I think is extremely difficult for an AI to do.
Well, we're all over here smiling as we're all in the go-to-market world. We're like, oh, okay, cool. We're secure. We have jobs for the next year. We did it.
Yeah, I think, there was one startup we met who said that 10 years ago, a software buyer was probably, at the point they contacted an AE, was about 10 to 15% of the way through their buyer journey by the time they reached an AE. And now, with all the webinars and the white papers and chatbots and stuff, the buyer is probably at 70% of the way through because they've educated themselves to a much greater extent. So I think that will continue to happen, right? But there'll always be, I don't know what you want to call it, 15 to 25%, where I'm calling Sam and I know Sam and I need an ERP and I trust Sam will deliver that ERP.
So how are you making these bets now that, let's say you meet 5 companies that are making the next version of the CRM? They're like, look at this, AI first CRM, all this cool stuff that we can do. And so they're making 5 similar products, AI native, interesting, could be disruptive, especially in SMB, could really take a lot of HubSpot's market share maybe. Great. How do you differentiate at that early stage between these 5 as to which one is going to be able to have go-to-market execution at the level to win this category? Like, what are you looking at that point?
Well, so at the very, very early stage, before there's significant metrics, the first thing you look for is the storytelling of the company. Can the company tell a story? Because, so one of the big differences, one of the things that's common to the early days of SaaS and the early days of AI is someone is betting their career on an architectural change. That's different, right? Like if I'm moving from HubSpot to Salesforce, there's no architectural change. I don't have to convince anybody to put the data in the cloud, sign up with a credit card or whatever. Everybody's done that. This is an architectural change. And so somebody is saying, I am willing to put my career on the line in this company because I believe this is the future. And if I do this, I will be promoted. And if I don't, I'll probably be out of a job. And so there is a startup founder within that CRM ecosystem who can tell that story. So I think that's number one, and probably the most important thing. And if you can tell that story and get people to believe, then the early adopters will look at it and say, like, AJ, you don't have the product that I want today. I know you don't. You know you don't. I have a roadmap, request list a mile long. But I think QuotaPath will be the winner because I believe you. And so I'm willing to make the bet today that in 24 months, the product will be closer to what I want. And you will be the market leader. And then I'll be able to put QuotaPath on my resume and that will get me the next gig. And so I think this is kind of the state of AI sales today, where you have to convince people that the career risk is worth taking. And there again, like going back to the previous point, an AI, a chatbot will never do that.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think there's a difference between selling evolution versus revolution. And right now we're selling a revolution. essentially, and it's really, really hard to do it. The other implication of what you're talking about seems to be on how the cost structure of a tech company might evolve. So there's this metric that a lot of people in the go-to-market community talk about these days, which is go-to-market efficiency. And essentially, the cost...
A lot of people, two people are talking.
Two people. I like it.
David Spitz created it, Tomas, the guy that used to do the Pacific Crest research study.
And David Scott's right hand in all of his data.
So it's how much money are you spending for $1 of net new ARR? And what they're showing is that we just keep spending more and more than we used to. And so so then there are people that are saying we need to try to get back. And what we've, or at least something I've been thinking about, is maybe we never get back to the go-to-market efficiency of pre-COVID. The world has changed too much. Actually, distribution is going to get harder. So the cost that goes into winning distribution increases, but you find efficiencies in other sides of your business, because one can imagine today that in a year or two from now, the amount of engineers you're going to need to build a product that is, let's say, a good Series A product, you might need half the engineers than what you needed today in just 2 years from now. Eventually, you might need a quarter. So what might happen is at the P&L level, the cost structure changes, where your R&D cost comes down, your go-to-market cost goes up, but it made sense overall. Do you see that playing out a little bit, that we're going to have to learn how to design these companies and organize them a little bit differently?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our startups, this company's basically just on the precipice of hypergrowth, and he was entering, the CEO was entering Q4, 10 software engineers, give or take, 11 or 12, maybe 15 proofs of concept. And he entered the quarter and he said, there's no way I can service all of these. He was telling me this over lunch. There's no way. We'll probably lose half because we cannot address them. And then he bought, one of his head of engineering said, hey, I want an AI coding tool for the whole team. So sure, no problem. He got it. They'll close like 75, 80% of those POCs. Wow. And then I asked him, hey, what's your engineering headcount plan for next year? And, a company will 4X or 5X or more. And he said, we're not hiring anybody.
Wow.
And so I think you're right. Like, I mean, I have this mental math or this like in my head where it's, okay, you can imagine like when a startup is at zero, 100% of the spend is on R&D. Yeah. And then by the time you're like 20 people or $1 million in ARR, maybe like 10% of the spend is on sales. And by the time you're 25 to 50, maybe 50% of ARR is spent on sales. And by the time you're at 100 million in ARR, okay, but it's 2X sales and marketing, whatever R&D is. We might get to the place where, headcount in R&D teams remains, maybe there's 25, 50 people for companies generating multi-$100 million of revenue. And so I think you're right. Like that's one big, you can have the sales efficiency, and I don't think you can put that genie back in the box. I think sales efficiency is monotonically increasing. And so the question is, okay, how do you justify it? One is a reduction in R&D expense. The other one, going back to the point we made earlier, is the ROI is better because you're automating more of the job. And so the customer is shifting their labor spend to software spend. You can charge more.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because we actually, for the first time, going to click in on one of your predictions, which was Sam completely hijacked this, and they will have 40 minutes.
It's been a great conversation.
It's been fantastic, way better than the original plan. But there was this prediction of you'll see the first $100 million ARR company with 30 or fewer employees in 2025. And when I read that, I thought of this. I was like, okay, how many in sales and marketing versus R&D? And I thought of like a 20-10, like 20 people in go-to-market, 10 in everything else. Is kind of where my mind landed up with something like that. It's just really interesting to see this shift that's happening.
Yeah, you can imagine maybe if it's a PLG company, it could be far less, right? Where you have 15 engineers, maybe 10 go to market, or 15 and 15.
How do you sell a revolution as PLG? like, when it comes to real sophisticated architectural changes that we're selling to end customers, like even a sophisticated salesperson struggles to get a person to buy a revolution and to put their career on the line and get the buy-in. How do you do that with PLG? Like, I've been wondering, like, the viability of PLG for complicated products in this phase shift.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think you can sell a complicated product through PLG. The companies that we've seen grow really fast in PLG solve a problem that is a Google search query.
Simple.
So within like insurance, how do I submit my semi-annual state report for me as an insurance broker that I never want to do? Sign up with a credit card, half of State Farm is signed up, then convert it to an enterprise account. The question with those kinds of go-to-market strategies is, well, they might be competed away very quickly.
Right.
And so the PLG strategy, I think, pretty quickly needs to be complemented with a broader suite strategy. And you could say, okay, well, given AI productivity of engineers, you look at Rippling. If you were to build Rippling today with AI, how much quicker could you build a suite? And so I think that's the risk that you would take both as a builder, as an investor.
Which, by the way, Rippling talks about this a lot. They have thousands of engineers, and they're like Conrad's talked about their R&D and how important it is. And so it will be interesting to see, given the number of products, they have like 50 SKUs, and the amount of products that they release. They just released an applicant tracking system, an ATS last month, like how fast they're developing, what their engineering and R&D looks like as well. It'll be interesting to see. Tomasz, did you have a company in mind? And you don't have to obviously state it when you're like made that prediction. Was there like a company that you've seen firsthand that you maybe even invested in that you're like, I think these guys are going to go all the way this year to get to that 100 million below?
No, I mean, I don't have a company in mind. I think Midjourney is probably, it's up there. I don't know if it's achieved that milestone already, but very, very small team with very significant revenue growth. But no, there was no company in mind when I made that prediction.
You did this SaaSter talk a little while ago, which was really interesting. And the two things that by
the way, a little while ago, it was 2 months ago, and I rewatched it, and it's like some of this feels out of date already. It's so crazy how the world is moving. I was like watching, I was like, I don't know if I agree with.
You're right. It was October, I think, right? October,
yeah,
November.
2 months ago, 3 months ago.
And so there were 2 or 3 things. One was this reason to not buy AI has shifted from security to ROI, which I thought was fascinating. The second was you spoke about the impact of extended sales cycles on a company, and I think it was really fascinating to see if a company's sales cycle increases by 50%. You give an example of a company whose burn then increased by 3x, and that's disastrous. And then the fact that you were speaking to some CROs who had implemented AI, who were seeing certain signals that it's working on their sales team. I think they were generating more pipeline, but then you ask them, how much of that pipeline are you closing? And the answer was nothing, which was also really interesting, and which I think comes down to your point of AI is not really driving a productivity increase in go-to-market just yet. Has your thinking around these 3 elements changed at all? Like, do you think sales cycles will continue to increase in 2025? Do you think that the reason to buy is going to shift from security to something else? From ROI to something else? And do you think that AI is going to start showing a result, and this is more about we haven't learned how to get the result, or something else?
Yeah, I think we haven't learned how to get the result that we want. And then once there are 2 or 3 companies in a category that demonstrate how to do it, everyone else will buy the software, and the sales cycles will collapse because there'll be such a fear of massive share shift.
FOMO. Yeah.
And so then it kind of collapses. I think over time, and we've seen 1,000x reduction in AI costs over the last 2 years. And so I think we'll probably see like another 100 to 1,000x in 25. And over time, and also like the use of small models and open source models, that will help. So I think if I had to pick the most important one that we would solve as an ecosystem to see massive growth, it would be the last one, which is users are now sophisticated enough, or the software takes the user input and then figures out how to manipulate the AI to produce what they want. if we could solve that problem, then your sales cycles, I mean, you're talking days, because there's just no way a sales leader or marketing leader will watch a competitor massively scale content or ads or account plans or use customer engagement, prospect engagement, and stand idly by.
Sam, you have the operationalization of AI in go-to-market as one of the themes for Pavilion's CEO Summit, and maybe even just for the entire year.
Indeed.
How are you thinking about people's openness to share all these things? I've been thinking about this idea of, is the ecosystem going to become more secretive now? So product innovation isn't defendable. So we try to actually not publicize it the same way. We're noticing this with models right now where they haven't really published what Sora's technical size, etc. Is they're holding more information to themselves. Will we see that happen across the ecosystem? In terms of product releases and the usage of different tools. We don't try to hold on to that. Or do you think people will openly share stuff like they have in the past? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a great question. And I think, I don't know about openly share, but I think market dynamics will force innovation out into the open and into the public domain. So, Ganto and Guillaume, I guess his nickname's G. I forget his last name. I think it's Carbon, but he was like the interim CMO for Ramp and was one of the people that helped. It was like one of the fastest growth rates to 100 million in ARR in, the last 10, 15 years. And he's now part of a consulting firm that teaches people how to operationalize AI in their go-to-market. And I think there's a lot of pontificators and people that don't know what they're talking about, but there's a lot of very hardcore practitioners and there's a lot of conversation about it. And I think both communities, it's communities like Pavilion, but also many other communities that are sprouting up on Discord, on Slack, on WhatsApp, and just informally, where people are sharing how they're deploying AI, how they're architecting their teams. There's this company Cargo, and this guy, I forget his last name, but the CEO and founder of it, who has coined this term GTM engineer, as it would replace SDRs, and that's what the new world is. And it's somebody that can use Clay and use all these automation tools and data enrichment tools to build custom workflows that can do exactly what Tomasz was just talking about. So I don't know that, because I guess one of the points that I'm making is I don't know a lot of the people that are going to be great at this are going to work at companies. I think they're going to be freelancers and mercenaries because I think people are so desperate for how does it actually work. And I think, again, to the point of why Pavilion exists, I think the idea that, I don't know, sales talent agency, no offense, but it's going to be the place where you go to become an incredible GTM engineer as part of your job in demand generation for sales talent agency, I think is just highly unlikely. I think that what you're going to have to do is talk to other people that are doing it. And I think it's going to be constant practitioners, constant, sharing their what's working, what's not working. So even though there might be big enterprises that are very protective about how they do this, I think one way or the other, people are going to be talking about how to implement and operate.
And I was talking
to be plugged into those communities.
Great point.
I was talking to the CEO of DBT Labs, Tristan, here in Philadelphia, that he's really could talk about communities and customers just coming to them. And 6 months ago, they were just saying we have money to spend on AI. How do we actually spend it? They didn't really have their point of view. And I caught up with him the other week around that. And it's hey, how's that going? Because that seemed like just such a huge, massive opportunity that you have just built this ecosystem and community centered around your product. It's a really, really big opportunity. It's yeah, we've been working, that's where we spend all of our time, day and night, on how do we operationalize this and bring this to market. But the thing that Tomasz said earlier, which is where the most gains are to be made, is in consulting and services. So it's interesting to see these AI services and consulting practitioners pop up, but also at the same time, that's the area where the most disruption probably will happen in 2025 as well. So I kind of I don't know if they're butting heads. Tomasz, I don't know if you think about that, or
but it's still the point, AJ, of trust. That's the point that
it's people
made. Is McKinsey going to be dislocated? No, probably not, because one way or the other, you're still making a big corporate decision. And even if McKinsey's EBITDA has skyrocketed by 10x because they don't have the whole junior layer of people out of school, because they're using AI to do all the research and all the strategy work, you still need. This is why brand is ultimately one of a very meaningful competitive. How many different companies are going to be teaching AI for go-to-market courses, online courses? I meet somebody every day that's going to be doing it. But when I do it, there's a much bigger brand behind it. And of course, if I'm competing with Wharton, then they've got a bigger brand than me. And so I feel like that's brand equals trust, and trust is how you reduce sales cycles, improve win rates. So then the question is, how do you build a brand? And again, that's not easy, and that's not cheap either.
It's not getting any cheaper. Tomasz, do you think that the services industry, that is this huge market when you loop all of services in, but it's not one type of services, right? You've got McKinsey and you've got Tata Consulting Services. And these are fundamentally different types of businesses. One is labor arbitrage for simple stuff. You're just essentially saying, I don't want the P&L headache of this cost, so you take the P&L headache, I'll give you a little bit of margin. Whereas when you're hiring McKinsey, you're not necessarily hiring them for that reason. So these are very different in terms of the sophistication of the service that they provide. How do you see AI impacting these two types of services companies? Like, is the near-term impact going to be on the Tata Consulting Services type of firms, the RPO agencies, like recruitment process outsourcing agencies, and then the McKinseys are going to benefit from the productivity enhancers that they can get, but the core of what they do still is defendable, or is it not? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think it was Accenture generated $3 billion of revenue in the first 9 months of 24. And that made them the single largest producer of AI revenue in the world. You're beating, Google, whatever. Setting aside the infrastructure companies, right? So whatever, we'll call them top 10. So I think just in terms of like lift to those businesses, the big outsourcing shops, they will benefit hugely if they're on the cutting edge. And our understanding is they're all of the major ones are either have individual teams or subdivisions where people are pushing pretty hard. They're partnering with startups to take advantage of that. So I think in this case, actually, it's the larger companies who will benefit more than the smaller companies. I think this, and I wonder, in debating this in my head, but I think this might be the leitmotif for AI overall, which is the big companies initially benefit on the first wave of interest in AI. The smaller companies are then forced to really innovate and differentiate, and they come up with something that's pretty meaningfully different. And then as a result, in the second wave, ultimately overtake.
Oh, that's interesting. So in this theory, like a lot of people have been saying 2025 is the year where enterprise SaaS companies, the publicly traded ones, are going to get demolished. But in this instance, they'll actually be the ones to first get the lift, and then eventually that'll give some time to, I don't know, like a Day.ai to get enough momentum to then attack them a year or two down the line. Is that?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think, okay, if I'm Salesforce, if I'm Mark Benioff, I'm not going to innovate on the models. I'm going to sell what the customer wants today. I'm going to sell like education, base level CRM automation. I will tack it on or integrate it to the extent that I can with my existing architecture. And then there'll be a founder someplace who says, you know what? That architecture no longer makes sense in this universe. I'm building, it's like the Uber app, right? The first time I used location that was native on the phone, never wanted to go back. And so I think that's what happens. And that founder will need to figure out a way of stitching together, 5 or 6 different models and completely reimagining the workflow, where you use a calcified beast that's focused on the BDR, the AE, the CSM motion that you and all of us grew up on. But that motion won't work anymore, right? It just doesn't, because the SDR is managing 50 email accounts. The AE is processing 2 or 3 times the number of leads. And so the existing workflows, the pipeline analysis that Clary or others have built may no longer be relevant because the underlying workflows have completely changed.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess that is a good place to end this and move into some shout outs, right?
We can do shout outs. So we can also do you have another question? Last week was pretty good. Normally at the end of the episode, Tomasz, we do shout outs and wins of the week. But then last week, Asad said, what is it, resolution for 2020?
What is the one big change you would want to make in 2025?
So maybe we'll ask you that, Tomasz. What's the one big change you're going to make in 2025?
Yeah. So I am every Sunday, I'm writing down, I'm looking at my calendar and I'm figuring out what could I have automated with AI last week.
Some part of what you do sounds fun and some part of it sounds exhausting, I have to say.
How much do you work, Tomasz? Like, what's your average week like? Like, how many hours do you work? Do you work early in the morning? Like, yeah, how do you spend your day?
Yeah, it's not crazy hours. I mean, I wake up at like 5 or 5:30, work out, eat breakfast, and then
What an asshole.
Asad's going to bed at that time, actually. That's his bedtime.
well, but I go to bed at like
I don't work that
8:30
much.
to
I'm up at
9:30.
3.
My day is just shifted earlier, right?
Yeah,
I'm not trying to be a jerk.
Fair enough.
So some people are night owls and some people are morning birds or whatever you want to call them. I like morning.
So you sit down every Sunday and you look at what could I have automated the last week, and then you try to do that for the next week.
Yeah, I mean, just take 45 minutes and figure out, okay, let's pull up an AI coding assistant. Can I transcribe podcasts? How long will that take?
Yeah.
Right. So I need the URL for the Topline podcast. And ask the AI to go through each of the emails and then figure out how to transcribe it. Just iterate.
Was that your Sunday automation task? Is that what you did on Sunday?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I've been working a little bit on that one, just try to understand and the hard part actually is not the coding, which is surprising. The hard part is the prompt, which is what do you tell the AI that you want?
Yeah.
And you can ask another AI, you can go to Claude and say, build me a prompt for this particular model to produce these following things. And that's a really great start. And they tend to be 500 words, which kind of blew my mind, right? Because we trade in the Google era of fewest keywords possible. But with AI, if you really want a project brief, you want a project requirements document.
Wow. That's a really great insight because you're right. In the era of Google, you're sort of taught like the order of the words doesn't matter. There's a lot of redundancy. Yeah. Shorter is better.
Specific.
The order of the words don't matter. Like you don't need to make sense in the traditional sense.
No, you don't.
Yeah. I found voice to be great for prompting. Like if you go onto voice and you say, I'm just giving you the prompt right now. And so we're going to talk through this. Once we're done, I'm going to move back to like the text mode. And it's like, okay, great. And I find that for me, it's easier to give it a complex prompt over voice and then move into the written format, the chat format to then work through whatever I want to work through with it.
It's so much more human. That's how, if you were to hire
my way through it.
Yeah. I mean, you're a CEO. That's what you do all day.
Yeah.
Meanders his way through it. That is what Asad does all the way.
That's
no. He's briefing people with voice. He's telling people this is the project that I want, right? And then those people are collaboratively, they assemble a document and then they agree on that. And then that person is delegated with the work and executes the work.
Yeah, that's true.
So Sam and AJ, question for you guys. What is one change one new way of using AI, one change in how you're using AI in 2025? Maybe based on this conversation, maybe based on something you did over the weekend. I don't know, but I
mentioned this, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago, but one thing I've done is I take all my weekly investor updates and all my weekly company updates and I upload them into one instance of ChatGPT, and I use that as basically like a high-level strategic interface to have conversations about where am I off base, where are things not aligned. Really, I'm trying to look for alignment. And then I think somebody told me, I forget who it was, create two personas and have them talk to each other. So I had my conservative board member and then my optimistic person, who's my dog, have a point of view on if Pavilion does really well and if it doesn't do really well. And I created a dialogue between them. But based on this conversation, one of the things I want to do is much deeper prompts. I want to take the time to think through, and I'm probably going to use, to Tomas's point, I'm probably going to use an AI to give me thoughtful prompts that I can then choose between so that I can get more sophisticated answers, because I've been, it's been like a very back and forth pithy conversation, but not as robust as I want it to be. So deeper, more thoughtful prompts. That's what I'm going to do. AJ?
I like that. AJ.
I have one, but Tomasz, do you find when you write prompts that you like assign a persona to the prompt? Like, hey, imagine you're a Harvard MBA grad that's thinking like this,
That's the beginning, right? Like you're an AP US English teacher, you're grading papers.
Prompt.
I find that the most annoying part of it, by the way. It's like it should just figure that out. Like if I'm asking you a question, figure out what mindset you should need to be in to give me the best answer to this question.
So, I mean, to that point, I think if you're building applications, AI applications, this will be a big part of the app, because many of these applications, they take your prompt and rewrite it and then send it to the AI.
So it's both a shout out and an AI is a tool that I've been using. I was introduced to last week is Cove.ai, which is pretty interesting. It's a unique, look at everyone going in and typing it in right now. I see it. It's actually a unique way of AI on the application layer that I hadn't seen. The use case that they come up with is planning a trip, but it creates all these cards. It has a PLG, so you can all like test this out. I have no like investment. I don't even know who the founders are, but it's pretty cool. Easy to sign up, and you can type in a prompt, and then it gives you all the cards. And within the cards, there's ways to like change the AI. I'll ask for inputs like you're taking a trip to Miami for the Orange Bowl for Penn State. Here's the links to the pre-tailgate party you should go into. If you want to have dinner with your friends, give me the dollar amount and I'll type it in. It gives you like a table for the agenda. And like we all use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever for travel. This is like the use case. I think there's a bigger workflow opportunity. So talking about workflows and how Gen AI works, it's pretty cool. So check it out, and I'll give a shout out
2 seconds
to Cove.ai.
This is the interesting thing. Like this was the Fathom stuff, right?
Yeah. They're all features and features. They're all databases. It doesn't matter.
It's brilliant, but in 7 minutes, some dude at the Notion is going to build it.
What I think you should do is pay influencers.
You get distribution, scale. We talked about this. Listen to the episode, Asad. We got there already.
Okay, I'll give mine.
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
I'm gonna go find the founder.
I'm sorry.
So I don't know how to cook. To the point where, like, if you asked me to fry an egg to save my life, I wouldn't know how to do it. And so over this break, I decided to use AI to cook a couple of meals for Sherry. And so this is the way that I used it. I was at the gym on a bike. I put voice mode on, and we came up with a menu. And then I went into Whole Foods, and it was in my ear, and it helped me shop, because I don't know where you find breadcrumbs. It's like, go in this aisle, look up there. Like, it was really interesting. So throughout the shopping experience, it was in my ear, and it made shopping a lot of fun. I must have looked like nutcase, but it was a lot of fun to shop. And then I came home, and it was just in my ear as I cooked the meal. And I went from not knowing how to fry an egg to cooking a meal with multiple different components to it. There was a salad, there were brownies, there was a steak. In the next meal, there was scones, a cake, saffron risotto, and a salmon that had been like baked, and everything from scratch, no mixes or anything. I don't know how to do any of this. Like, I didn't even know you have to mix the thing. And it was a her moment for me, where I was
Neo in the Matrix.
That was wild. Like, it blew my mind. Where now I'm excited. I'm like, Sherry, what do you want to eat? Like, I want to go cook something new because I now know how to do it. There's something in my ear that tells me. And I'll be like, hey, I don't have this thing. I don't know how to measure the heat of a steak. It's like, use your finger, poke it like this. And it was so perfect.
That's so cool.
Oh, and then I had AJ giving me some tips in the background as well. AJ was my human tips.
That's really cool.
A little bit of tips.
That's my use.
That was
AI mostly,
Tomasz,
but
thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being a supporter of Topline and Pavilion for many years. And we're excited to cheer you on and hopefully help you support the companies that you're investing in.
Feelings mutual. Have a great 2025, everybody. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks, Tomasz.
This episode was brought to you by AirCall, the business communications intelligence platform. Deliver a better experience for your customers and your teams at AirCall. That's AIRCALL.io. Save time, save money, and improve performance with a single communications platform.
Thanks for listening to Topline. New episodes come out every Sunday. If you like what you heard today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to join our Topline Slack channel to connect with us and discuss the topics we cover with other listeners. Click the link in the show notes. Lastly, if you're interested in joining Pavilion, you can learn more about membership at joinpavilion.com/membership. Thanks again for listening.